Cox Automotive, what the heck is it? I mean, Cox Automotive didn't exist until last year. So while a lot of people are familiar with the name Cox, it's usually with the media properties, the cable company, the what have you. So we'll talk a little bit about Cox Automotive and where we fit in there. We'll talk about Membase/Couchbase. So our usage of the product goes back to when it was branded as Membase back probably 4 years ago now. So historically, we had a very specific caching problem to solve. In a more contemporary time frame, we've been solving some other problems recently. And then moving forward, what is it that we're looking at 4.0 to provide for us, right? So that's kind of the stuff that we'll be going through today. So Cox Automotive. The two biggest, most obvious brands that you see, because they're consumer facing, is AutoTrader and KBB. Hit something like 40 million views a month, I think. People looking at cars, finding cars, researching their next car purchase. They're the more obvious consumer side of Cox Automotive. We recently, in fact this week, finally closed the deal. We purchased DealerTrack for $4 billion this week. DealerTrack was very similar to Cox Automotive in that they were serving the dealer automotive industry. We'll be, I'm sure, spending the next many months to years learning how to integrate these companies together, bring their products together to support each other. And then you get the other 20 some odd companies that make up Cox Automotive. And they range from companies that provide CRM services to dealers. So they're keeping track of, you know, we sent you an email, you came in, you looked at a car, we made a phone call, hey, you bought a car, need to bring it in for service and what have you. Some of these companies are helping dealers figure out what cars should I be buying, where should I be pricing them, what should I be selling them for in my market based on how everyone else is doing today. And then you get, so the division that I'm with, HomeNet Automotive, we focus on merchandising of vehicles. So we are focused on getting information out of the dealer's management system, modifying that data, putting it up on autotrader.com, cars.com, roughly 2,000 different endpoints where that data goes to before it's all said and done. So what do we do at HomeNet? We describe it as get, edit, and deliver. We pull in somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 terabyte worth of files every day. We process, we keep about 10 million cars live in inventory at any given time. Sorry, inventory. Within our database, that's the cars that are actively being merchandised. And every day, roughly 6 million of them change. So when you look at it, I was amazed when I first came in to the industry. You know, you come in and go, oh, it's, you know, you're advertising cars, you're selling cars. How exciting and hard can that be? The rate of data change that goes on and the amount of scaling that we have to be able to do is amazing to anybody coming in from the outside generally. So what kind of data are we looking at? I mean, this is just a subset, but essentially what we're trying to show here is that every vehicle has data sourced from 4, 5, 6 different places. We get feeds from, for example, Ford directly on what did that car look like when it came off the line. We get feeds from Carfax, you know, what's the history of that used vehicle that just came through. We get information from the DMS system, which is generally hand-entered by the dealers themselves as they bring that car into their inventory. And all of this has to be kind of brought together. There's a huge rule set that goes into this, because if I'm a dealer and you have 4 different pieces of information for the color of that car, how do I know which one I want? And if there's one thing you know about car dealers, if you have 1,000 of them, you've got 1,100 opinions on what to do. So basically, we run a very large, complicated rules engine behind the scenes here. So essentially, all that data comes in, and where does it go? It goes out to dealer websites. So you go to your local dealer, and they have cars on their websites. In tens of thousands of cases, that data came through us and got published directly to their website. The image may even literally be hosted by us. Goes out to classified ads, OEM sites, and then obviously you saw AutoTrader and KBB on the other side there. And it's not just the vehicle data itself. One of the Cox Automotive companies up here is AIS, which is the most important company you've never heard of if you're buying a car. They collect every rebate, every dealer incentive, every consumer incentive that every OEM is offering at any given time on every model car. And we publish that information out to the dealers, to Kelley Blue Book. So when you go there and you pick a car and you find out, oh, there's $2,000 cash back on this if I buy it in this zip code within this time frame. That information is flowing through our systems as well. This one's always a fun slide because, again, I mentioned, nobody appreciates how much data changes through the car industry. Our rate of change right now averages about 2 terabytes a day. It's about the same as the NASDAQ runs. So that's kind of what we were doing, who we are. So what did we start with Couchbase early, right? We collected all this data about cars, and you can get an idea of kind of the number of fields involved here. There's 10 or 12 tabs on the left. Half of them have more sub-tabs in the internal. It is amazing what you can record about a car. It's almost ridiculous. Images are no small part of that. So you say we got 10 million cars in inventory at any given time. Generally, we're running between 200 and 300 million active images at any given time. We will serve somewhere on the order of 100 million requests an hour, give or take, for us and for AutoTrader. And that is including the fact that Akamai is sitting on the front of that, picking up somewhere between 57 and 60% of the traffic. And many of these images are being scaled, they're being overlaid. So you get a dealer and they have their header that they want on their image. All these rule sets come into play to modify all this data before it goes back out the door. We keep a history of every car. So from the time that car comes into our system, we retain every edit from every source. We can tell you, as those rules were applied, it came in from the dealer system with $1,000, and then it got modified to $800 by a rule that they wrote that said 30 days on the lot, reduce the price. Then it got modified by, we keep all those interstitial values because every time the dealer calls up and says, hey, I just looked at cars.com and the car didn't have the right price, we have to be able to replay and say, here's how we got exactly there. Your guy, Joe, went in and modified the price, and that's how it landed. So these next couple of diagrams, I apologize a little bit. When you ask your architects for simple diagrams, you have to give examples, because in their minds, these are. But essentially, it's the get, edit, deliver, right? So you've got on the blue box over there, all the feeds coming in. In the middle, all the green is where we're modifying all that data. The yellow are all the data sources, and then the orange coming out the other side is where we're sending that data back out. Again, this is their idea. We're going to be here only for half a second. Where we started bringing Couchbase in was in these data sets down here, and they're primarily focused on the rules engines. Going into SQL Server, extracting all that information, using it to apply to the vehicular information so that we could prepare it for export was getting prohibitive. When you look at doing 6 to 10 million of these a day and measuring the duration of each process in fractions of a second, having to hit SQL Server to get them, even if it only added 100 or 200 milliseconds, could double the amount of time that we were taking. And as we tried to scale, as Brian mentioned earlier today, you can only scale your SQL servers up so fast or so far. And so as we were leading up to the release of our product, version 2 of our product a couple of years ago, we ran into a situation where we had the SQL servers, but as we added more and more load, it became clear we were going to have to upgrade that hardware, and that is a large investment in both time and money. And so we were looking for something that we could do in a period of weeks, not months, to try and take load off the SQL servers and to provide scalability.
Question.
Go ahead.
Which of these data sets are real-time and which of these are batch? And when do you run them?
So the files coming in are all, they're batch by nature. And one of the things that we'll get to a little later is, when you go back 2 or 3 years, this whole industry was batch, at least on the automotive side. Everybody sent you files, you processed the data, and you spit files back out. A lot of our work in the last 18 to 24 months has been the conversion from a batch to a more real-time solution where we've added web services onto the front, and you'll see when we get where we've used Couchbase and some of those as well as almost a spring, if you will. So as web service calls are coming in, we grab the information, we do very light validation on that information, we shove a document in Couchbase, we return a reply that says, yeah, I got it, and move on. Because the goal is to get those callers off your web servers, your service servers, as fast as possible. And then in the middle tier, we have processing that's picking that information up out of Couchbase and doing that work. Did I answer your question? Okay. So actually, I'll go back here for one brief second. The other thing of interest here is inside of that caching process, how many different individual things are going on with that car. Each of those boxes is kind of a different metamorphosis of that information, that data as it goes through. And today, because of the way it was structured, it's very transactional. So you pulled a whole bunch of data out of SQL Server, you ran all of those things together, and then you put a bunch of lump data back in. So as we move forward, what we did, as I mentioned, we needed a quick and fast way to relieve pressure. And so what we did was we memoized the custom rule set, and we started storing that in Couchbase down here. And so essentially the system, from its perspective, was unchanged. We had a little bit of a layer that said, go to Couchbase first and see if you can find the aggregated memoized rule set that you need. And if the answer is yes, here you go. And if the answer is no, go all the way to SQL Server, pull out 15 or 20 relational data sets, morph them all together into that document, put it in Couchbase, and then give it back. And so Couchbase, at the time Membase started out for us, we picked it up for very specific reasons. We started out with Memcached, but we are a very much Microsoft shop and technology stack. And so it didn't fit well into our technology stack. And so when we started looking around, Couchbase, Membase had a Windows installer for Memcached. It used the exact same interfaces, the exact same clients, but was able to be easily adopted into our tech stack early on. And it was a caching tier for us. It literally could go away and our system would function, but not at the throughput that we needed. So it was very much a dynamic caching layer for us, but what it did get us that Memcached did not was persistence. So I could run a cluster. I had enough disk persistence that if I lost a node, I could bring another node up. We would do a lot of adding and removing nodes in the early days, and it was nearly zero impact. Once the rebalancing finished in a few seconds, nobody would notice. And so we could do that live. So that was really our first foray with Couchbase. We spent 2 weeks, tops. From the time we realized that Membase, Couchbase was going to get us what we needed to the time we put it into production was about 2 weeks.
How long ago was that?
3 years, maybe 4. I want to say 2011 or 12. So that was our foray, and it worked out amazingly well. One of the things we had to do was to do operationalization of this stuff as well, if I can risk making up a word. So we have an entire monitoring team and system that is used to keep an eye on the health of various parts of our system. And one of the things we liked very much about the Couchbase product at the time was not only the UI on it, but also the fact that everything on the UI is just a JSON blob you can pull out. And so we took our monitoring systems and taught them how to come in, every few seconds and just say, how many things do you have in the bucket? What's the cache miss ratio? How often are you hitting the disk? Because our goal was that everything sat in RAM. So those were the reasons that we started with the product, and honestly, everything we've done with it, we've been happy with. So going forward, nice segue earlier. So going forward, we're moving out of that batch system and more into a web API-based system. Your larger dealer groups want their information in and out faster. If anything, it's been an interesting change in the industry. The dealer groups, the dealers obviously want their data moved faster. The interesting part has been getting sources like cars.com and places where you're sending the data to take it faster. Because all of their systems have to change as well. Being that we're in the same family with Autotrader.com has helped tremendously because we work very closely with them. They have services on their side. So one of the companies we didn't talk about was Manheim. I don't, if you've never heard of them, they're a large international car auction company. So car dealers bring the cars they don't want to try and sell themselves. Manheim auctions them essentially to other dealers. And then those dealers need to market those cars. Well, because Manheim, HomeNet, and AutoTrader are all together in the same family, what ends up happening, and we just put this in production recently, we get a message within seconds of Manheim closing an auction on a car. And if that dealer who bought that car subscribes to a particular product with us, that car will go through our system and be posted up on AutoTrader within about 10 minutes. And we have case studies today where cars have literally been advertised and soft sold before they've gotten on the truck at the auction to go to the dealer. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing with Couchbase in integrating across the multiple business units within Cox. So accelerating the pace, back to the big scary diagram, the point again being that, so we're coming through it again because we're focused a little more on getting the data. We were talking about modifying the data internally. Now we're trying to get it in faster, right? Get it in instead of from files through this API. And where the files come in today and load a pile of staging tables in a SQL Server database, the NTN, the near-time network for us, comes in, puts it in Couchbase, moves on. The goal being obviously throughput and scalability for us. So where we before had Couchbase really just as a caching mechanism that was essentially entirely optional for our processing in terms of functionality, if not scalability, now it has become a system of record for parts of our data where all the data lived in SQL Server and was cached in Couchbase. Now there is data that will only live in Couchbase. And as part of that, we've not only had to expand our usage of Couchbase, but we've had to go back operationally and look at it and make sure, okay, what's my backup strategy? What's my restore strategy? You know, if I completely lost a data center, how much data do I lose? How much time do I lose? What does all that look like? And that was a step that we were able to take when we moved from Couchbase 2 to 3 with the cross data center replication.
When was that?
Last year, 14.
Do you have any kind of penalties in case some data is lost?
Any kind of what?
In case some data is lost?
Do I have any, I'm sorry, what?
Any penalties from the
Oh, penalties. We can, in the sense that, you know, if I lose the original data that the dealer sent me, for example, through the API, that essentially becomes a car that we are no longer putting out to the marketing sites for them. So, you know, what that might mean to customer service, you know, I'm not sure. But clearly that dealer cares. I mean, every car that a dealer advertises is their baby, to hear them talk about it. So what are the things that we did there? And I'm not sure if there's, what's the next slide? So some of the API design features, you know, they're very RESTful. We use JSON internally, which has been very nice moving forward with Couchbase with the JSON representation internally. I think, not Brian, but the gentleman before him referenced that. It saves a lot of boilerplate with trying to take something that is inherently a hierarchical object and turn it into a, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't already know, right? This has been very helpful for us as well. I mentioned earlier that when the feeds come in, every feed represents a table in SQL Server. We can't even open it in SQL Server Management Studio. If you attempt to ask it to list out the number of tables, it just crashes. There's just so many sources of data, so many versions of that data, and it's just not relational at the end of the day. You know, it was the hammer that we had in hand 5 or 6 years ago that everybody got used to using. And if anything in this industry is true, you spend half your time researching the next thing and half your time undoing the thing you did 2 years ago. Yeah.
So you say that you moved out, so you effectively moved away from SQL Server because your document structure and your data structure is not relational. Is that fair? Or?
No, we'll never leave SQL Server for certain kinds of data. And so long term, if I look down the road, I think SQL Server is still the system of record for anything transactional. So particularly when you're dealing with like customer configuration information where I can't have half the configuration look one way and half the other. It'll get too disjointed, too out of sync. Where I think you'll find that we use more and more NoSQL solution is going to be in things that are ephemeral in the sense that I only have a car in inventory for a month, maybe two, if you do a good job selling it. That to me is ephemeral. And information that could be reconstituted, certainly. You know, it would be expensive to spend, you know, a day trying to rebuild 10 million cars from the ground up with reapplying the rule sets, but you could do it. That really, I think, is where we draw that line. Now, that's not where we're at today. As we started life 5 or 6 years ago with one giant SQL server, and I'm sure you can imagine where that, took us. But at the time, we were a very small company pre-acquisition, and we were envisioning we may someday hit 6 million cars. When we were purchased by AutoTrader and brought into Cox Automotive, we went from someday we might envision maybe hitting 6 million cars. We hit 10 million within a year. Something to be said for the fact that we supported it, but that was really kind of what drove us into that crap. I got 2 weeks to find a way to take some load and distribute some load. But a lot of the work we did at that same time was to take that monolithic SQL Server database and turn it into 5 or 6 databases. But even at that, there's only so much you can do, right? There's only so much data I can really separate. There's only so tall I can make those servers in terms of my scaling.
Now what about your plans with 4.0 and SQL capabilities with Netco?
I will definitely get there.
Okay.
There are things about 4.0 that we've been kind of chomping at the bit a little bit on. So again, the JSON storage for us, what is interesting on this for us is as we move away from that batch-oriented model to a more like a CQRS type model, an event-driven model, being able to store each of the messages and then bring them together with changing rule sets and reapply those rule sets to the original raw data, and even to apply different rule sets based on where that data is going. Today, once we build your car, that's the car that's going out to various places. But to be able to say, no, I want this price to be put on the car when it goes to cars.com, but a different price if it goes to AutoTrader and a different price if it's on my website. Those kinds of things, to be able to do those in a more event-driven CQRS type model, this is going to help us do that as well because we can store all those interstitial pieces much more easily than you can in a relational schema because they inherently look different. So we get A, we get B, we smush them together into C. We can keep multiple versions of it, as I mentioned, why that's useful to us. XDCR. So I mentioned this a little earlier, that suddenly being able to keep my data alive and up and well is important when that's the only place I can go get it, and recovery is painful at best, if not impossible. We run 2 data centers today. Each data center has a hardware cluster for Couchbase of 4 servers each. And we use XDCR in order to keep those clusters in sync. And we actually built a little bit on top of it as well. So today, if you lose a node out of your cluster, there's some period of time that measured in fractions of a second to maybe a couple seconds, depending on how backed up you are, where the primary version of that object is gone, but the replicate version hasn't quite been promoted yet. And if you went to the cluster, the answer you get back is, yeah, I don't have that, but I've got a replica of it somewhere. And so we taught our software to say, okay, if you get that answer, go back and go get the replica. Because we're trying to embrace this eventually consistent, right? Eventually, Couchbase will get the replica promoted, and the next request that comes in fractions of a second later will get it on the first try. But at the same time, we're designed, ideally, to be able to run hot. out of not only our 2 private data centers, but as we start moving into the cloud. And so being able to synchronize amongst those locations and having a request comes in that writes data in data center number 1, and then a request comes in that needs data in data center number 2, but it hasn't quite synchronized yet, you know it's going to get there. So you can either reroute the request to the other data center, you can make a request to that other cluster to get that information. There's a lot of flexibility in what you can do here as you set these things up together. But the important part is that the boilerplate's made. We have a lot of conversations that we have internally on core versus context. What's the core of what we do? The core of what we do is collecting vehicle information, modifying it, and marketing it out to companies, not writing synchronization software. That's somebody else's job. Not writing, SSO software, not writing, take your pick, right? Those are the things that are contextual for us. We need them to be able to do what we do the best that we can, but they're not the things we need to be experts in. And so that's where we come back to Couchbase and go, the synchronization, the client driver software that allows us to find out, okay, yeah, I kind of have that object, but it's over here. You need to ask for it a little differently until I get rebalanced. Those things are all built in. What we haven't yet done with XDCR, which we plan on doing, is the bidirectional synchronization. Today we push one direction, and we run primarily operationally out of one data center, and we'll run kind of read-only type operations out of the other. The things that we do run hot are done like that. So we don't tend to edit in both data centers today. That is one of the things we're looking at moving to going forward, particularly as we move things out to the cloud. And it's always going to be this odd hybrid for us. In today's day and age, there is no reasonable way for me to pick up a 4 terabyte set of SQL Server databases and put them at, Amazon or wherever it is that you want to do the cloud, right? But there are a lot of pieces of this system, as you looked at the different boxes, that I could lift up, and as long as I can create a message that contains the information that box needs to do its work, I can start moving boxes to other data centers, I can move them to the cloud, I can move them wherever. So your piece of free advice for the day. If you're going to run multiple data centers and you're going to run with XDCR, make sure your times are in sync. We spent an almost embarrassing amount of time trying to figure out why objects that all the logs said had done a synchronization didn't show up over there, and it was because one data center, for whatever reason, was 4 hours off. Well, not the whole data center, I'm sure, but.
Wouldn't that be a candidate for XDR, whatever protocol Couchbase uses to incorporate that time difference in there?
That is a conversation that we've had with Couchbase. At the very least, tell me when I set up the synchronization between the 2 clusters that they're out of whack.
That's the problem everybody would be facing.
Yep. That's why I was willing to, eat my crow a little bit and put it up there and have the conversation. We are software engineers like every other group in the world. We dive after the most complicated answer we can dream up. No, the only problem was the clocks were out of sync.
Could you also talk about which data elements of of your data store you have in the index versus SQL Server versus Couchbase as a data set?
So when you said in an index, I assume you meant within Couchbase?
Yes.
We do build our own indexes on the fly. I don't know if you were in here for the previous session, the gentleman right before me was talking about. So if there are specific ways we know that we'll go after data, give me all the cars for dealer ID 123. We'll make sure as we're putting data in and out that there is another list of lists, essentially, where I can go take a dealer and find the keys for all the cars within Couchbase. I can't claim that we've done more than play and do proof of concept with the nickel stuff yet. It is one of the 2 or 3 big features that we're looking to leverage in 4.0. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, maybe let's say whether the car is sold or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's a key piece of information because you don't want 2 people trying to buy the same car at the same time. One of them gets very disappointing.
Right. but remember, we're not selling the cars. We're advertising the cars.
All right.
And at the risk of making dealers sound bad, because I know you all have a very high opinion of car dealers, they really don't mind if you keep advertising their cars after they're sold. Yeah, people call.
But that's not on purpose.
No, no, never.
It's marketing.
So we don't have that particular problem in the sense that, because that becomes a transactional problem, right? For us, the transactional problems are more around dealers or customer service changing the configurations of what we do to those cars and how we do it. Not so much whether or not the car went out the door to cars.com or AutoTrader or what have you.
Not even in the Manheim scenario?
So in the Manheim scenario, what is interesting there is, and it's an edge case, but it's the case where somebody bought a car, auction's closed, we put it up on AutoTrader, good to go, and for whatever reason they can't get a signature on the paperwork. The title's messed up, the financing fell through, whatever it is. Right now it's a scenario we just live with, and because it's a rare occurrence, and somebody just fixes it by hand. But we're in the process of doing analysis for picking up kind of a failed sale message and sort of backing that back out. Any other questions? I got a couple more things I can chat about, but yeah.
Aside from XDCR, do you do anything else for backup and restore connected?
We do. So one of the things we do out of that sort of semi-passive data center is, I'd say every 15, 20 minutes, we run a backup of Couchbase over there. So our backups, in theory, are only behind by however many transactions are in the queue to make it through the XDCR operation. And that particular queue is something we're putting on our monitoring system so that we have an idea, you know, if the queue runs down here, that's normal. If the queue gets huge, then a couple of things are possible. We're overrunning the processing, which is a little unlikely, or more likely the line between the data centers went down. So it becomes kind of a canary in a coal mine kind of an operation. You know, if I didn't get the notification from the network team that I lost my cross data center link, that would tell me pretty quick. Any other questions? So where are we going forward? So I talked about this a little bit. SQL Server, we literally bought the biggest SQL Server hardware that Dell sells and proceeded to stuff it with either 2 or 4 Fusion IO cards, which are basically giant RAM disks. It helps tremendously, no doubt, but the thing that you have to be aware of from an architectural perspective is that's it. You know, until somebody develops the next SQL Server, there's nowhere else to go. And so we look very hard now at everything we store to figure out what makes sense. And that's where, like I was saying, transactional information, configuration information, no-brainer for SQL Server. Ephemeral information, things that either can be reconstructed or things that are part of our ever-flowing pipeline, constantly changing, makes much more sense in a NoSQL solution, and Couchbase has really been our only real choice in the sense that between its cross-platform support, its operational support, its user interface, the support team themselves, it's been a phenomenal experience all around for, like I said, going on 4 years now. So what are we doing? So there's another use case that we have that is probably not unique in the sense that, so we have production, and everybody likes to talk about production, right? But then there's the act of, I have to actually write software. I have to actually be able to test software. How do I do that? And traditionally, historically, what we've done is, okay, every 2 weeks we take a backup of all the SQL servers in production and we copy those files over and we restore them into a staging environment, and that's where we do our full-scale data testing to find all the queries that worked great on the developer's laptop and didn't work in production. In addition to that, we have somewhere around 15 or 20 other environments that are used for a mixture of testing, QA, dev testing when you want to get outside of just being on your desktop. And those environments are not capable of restoring a full copy of production. And so what we've historically done is they have a SQL server, and we have a migration tool where you can go in and say, I want to test with these 300 dealers. Go migrate all their data out of that staging environment into this local testing environment so that I can do some focused testing with those data sets. One of the 4.0 features that we're quite excited about, that slide seems out of place, sorry. So this is kind of how it works today. You know, everything comes over to the QA environment, not manually, but in this monolithic move that happens every few weeks. What we're looking at moving to with version 4 here is this filtering on the XDCR. So now I can say, all right, testing 04, you care about these 300 dealers, set up that filter, and now there's replication going on at the Couchbase level, but only for those 300 dealers. And again, it goes back to the core and context. Could I write yet another migrator that does all this for me? Yeah, but why? Not my job. My job's marketing cars. And that's really the end of it there. So I'm open to any and all questions. I think I've been with Cox Automotive and HomeNet for as long as we've used Couchbase, Membase, Memcached. So hopefully I have enough context and history to answer whatever you got.
Is performance, how many is performance a criteria for you in terms of marketing, person looking at the cars?
The performance for us is important in the sense that there's so many cars and so much is changing. So, you know, like I mentioned, we have anywhere from 250,000 to 500,000 cars change any given hour. And in that time, you know, generally we spend about a quarter second per car on average, taking it from raw data to final output form, whatever that may look like based on all those rules. And so performance is important for us. And one of the things that we've liked about Couchbase is how easy it is to add another one. We use some of the other NoSQL products in some other niche cases, and none of the others we've played with or used can I add a node literally within about 5 minutes. I mean, from the time I build the machine and install Couchbase, putting it into the cluster is it's a no-op in terms of customer impact. So, you know, today we have 4 machines per cluster. Somewhere in the first quarter, I'll put a 5th one in each cluster. We haven't yet looked at if or how the new tiering models in 4.0 would impact the way we work today. Because right now it's just 4 machines, 5 machines, they all look alike. Whether or not we would just say they all can run queries, whether we would try to specialize, we haven't really done that analysis yet. Any other questions?
Tony, you were going to touch on nickel and your thoughts about using that. Is there anything?
Oh.
I missed it, but was there anything particular you were thinking about on that?
No, you're right. We didn't really talk about it. Yes, because what we'd like to get away from is building our own indexes. It's another piece of overhead, right? It's another thing that we're doing that is contextual, not core, that we do simply to improve performance. But if we can query for that same information and not either build our own indexes or create indexes, it's just one less thing to worry about. Anything else? All right, well, there you go. I'm no longer between you and lunch. Thank you.